Sometimes the things we rescue end up rescuing us right back. In a small town where everyone's watching and nobody forgets, a broken horse and a broken man find each other at the worst possible time. At the county livestock auction, a scarred mare limps into the ring. The crowd laughs her off. But Clay Mercer, an aging cowboy drowning in debt and regret, sees something nobody else does. He buys her for almost nothing and names her Hollow. What begins as an act of stubborn kindness becomes something much deeper, a second chance neither of them expected. But can a man who's lost everything and a horse the world gave up on prove that redemption is still possible? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun hadn't yet burned off the frost when Clay Mercer stepped out onto the sagging porch of his ranch house. The boards creaked under his boots, a sound that had become familiar as his own breathing over the 43 years he'd lived here. First as a boy, then as a man, and now as something he couldn't quite name anymore. The land stretched out before him in all directions. 200 acres of Montana grassland that his grandfather had won in a poker game back in 1947 and turned into something worth keeping. These days, Clay wasn't so sure it was worth anything at all. He pulled his jacket tighter against the October wind and walked toward the barn. His stride had a hitch in it, legacy of a fall that had ended his rodeo career 15 years back. Some mornings it hurt more than others. This morning, everything hurt. The barn doors hung crooked on their hinges. He'd been meaning to fix them for 2 years now. But like most things around the place, it got added to a list that never seemed to get any shorter. Inside, the familiar smell of hay and old leather greeted him. In the corner, catching the first slant of sunlight through the gaps in the wall, sat his grandfather's saddle on a wooden stand. Clay stopped and looked at it the way he did most mornings, a ritual of remembrance and regret. The leather was worn smooth in places, cracked in others. The silver conchos his grandfather had polished every Sunday until they gleamed like mirrors were now tarnished green. Clay hadn't polished them in years. Couldn't bring himself to, really. The saddle represented everything he'd failed to live up to. His grandfather, Dutch Mercer, had been a horseman of the old school. Fair but firm, patient but demanding. He'd taught Clay everything about working with horses, about reading the land, about being the kind of man who kept his word, even when it cost him. Dutch had won the state championship 3 times in team roping, had built this ranch from nothing into something that fed a family and employed 3 ranch hands. He'd been somebody. Clay was 54 years old, and he was nobody. He turned away from the saddle and grabbed a bucket, filled it with feed for the 2 remaining horses in his care. Used to be he'd had a dozen, not just these 2. Cisco and Bell, both too old for much work but too loyal to sell. They nickered softly when he appeared, their breath making small clouds in the cold air. "Morning, you 2, he said quietly, distributing the feed between their stalls. Bell nuzzled his shoulder, and he scratched behind her ears the way she liked. These small kindnesses were all he had left to give. By the time he'd finished the morning chores, the sun had cleared the eastern ridge, and the day had begun in earnest. Clay walked back to the house, made coffee in the same percolator his wife Eleanor had used every morning for 30 years. The coffee was always too strong, too bitter, but changing it felt like erasing her, and he couldn't do that. He sat at the kitchen table with his mug and the pile of unopened mail he'd been avoiding. The envelopes were mostly bills. Some had red stamps on them now. A few were from Thomas Harrigan at First Montana Bank, those he knew without opening. Tom had been in his graduating class at Stillwater High, had played football while Clay rode broncs. Now Tom wore pressed suits and held the paper on Clay's ranch, and the friendship they'd once had lay buried under the weight of money owed and promises broken. Clay opened the most recent letter from the bank. The words swam together at first, but the meaning was clear enough. 90 days. 3 months to come up with $48,000, or the ranch would go to auction. He set the letter down and looked out the window at the land his grandfather had won, his father had maintained, and he was losing. The phone rang, a rare enough occurrence that it startled him. He let it ring 4 times before answering. "Clay, it's Sarah. Sarah Brennan. Widowed 3 years back when her husband Frank had a heart attack out checking fence line. She ran the neighboring spread, smaller than Clay's but better maintained. They'd become friends in the way that lonely people sometimes do, carefully, keeping a respectful distance from anything that might feel like replacing what they'd lost." Morning. "Sarah, you going to the auction today?" Her voice had that particular quality that made it clear she already knew the answer and was asking anyway. Clay hadn't planned on it. Auctions meant people, meant seeing folks from town who'd watch him with that mix of pity and judgment that made his skin crawl. But Sarah wouldn't ask unless she thought he should go, wasn't planning on it. "You should come. Get out of that house for a few hours. Besides, there's supposed to be some good livestock coming through. Never know when you might see something worth the drive." Clay looked at the letter from the bank still lying on the table. "Don't have money for livestock, Sarah. Don't have money for much of anything these days." There was a pause. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. "I know, but sometimes we need to remember what we're fighting for. Come to the auction. If nothing else, I'll buy you lunch after." He wanted to say no, wanted to stay here in his familiar misery, avoiding the world and the questions in people's eyes. But Sarah had a way of cutting through his stubbornness, and maybe she was right. Maybe he did need to remember. "All right," he said. "I'll meet you there." The Stillwater Livestock Auction sat on the edge of town in a sprawling complex of holding pens and metal buildings that smelled of manure and diesel fuel. Clay pulled his truck into the gravel lot and sat for a moment, gathering himself. Through the windshield, he could see clusters of ranchers and dealers, men in clean Stetsons and pressed shirts, their boots polished. Clay looked down at his own clothes. Faded jeans, a flannel shirt with a frayed collar, boots that had seen better decades. He'd been one of them once, had stood in those circles talking cattle prices and grass quality. Now he was the cautionary tale they probably discussed when he wasn't around. Sarah was waiting by the entrance, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a practical braid. She smiled when she saw him, and it was genuine, one of the few smiles he got anymore that didn't feel like charity. "There you are. Thought you might chicken out." "Thought about it," he admitted. They walked in together, and Clay felt the familiar weight of attention shift toward them, then away. People noticed, but pretended not to. It was the social choreography of small-town life. Everyone knew everyone else's business, but you maintained the fiction of privacy. The auction ring was already busy. An auctioneer's rapid-fire patter echoed through the metal building, numbers and lot descriptions bleeding together into a rhythm that was almost musical. They found seats in the wooden bleachers, high enough to see but not so close that Clay had to make conversation with anyone. Cattle came through first. Good stock, mostly. Angus and Herefords with clean lines and healthy weight. The bidding was brisk, competitive. Clay watched with the detached interest of someone who remembered being part of this world, but no longer had a stake in it. Sarah leaned over occasionally to comment on a particular animal or point out someone in the crowd. "That's the banker there," she said quietly, nodding toward a man in the front row. "Tom Harrigan." Clay had already spotted him. Tom sat with a tablet in his lap, making notes. He looked prosperous, comfortable. Everything Clay wasn't. "Yeah, I know." Sarah gave him a sympathetic look, but didn't press. She understood the complicated math of small-town relationships, the way debts and history created obligations that twisted friendship into something harder. The cattle cleared, and they moved to horses. This was what Sarah had really brought him to see. She loved horses the way some people love children, with an uncomplicated devotion that Clay envied. Geldings and mares paraded through, most of them solid working stock. The bidding was more measured here, more thoughtful. Then the atmosphere in the room changed. A murmur rippled through the crowd, the kind that preceded either something remarkable or something pitiful. Clay sat up straighter, trying to see what had caused it. The gate opened and a horse limped into the ring. Even from the bleachers, Clay could see the animal was in poor shape. A mare, maybe 6 or 7 years old, dark brown with a white blaze on her face that was half hidden by the way she held her head down. Her ribs showed through her dull coat. She favored her right front leg, and there were scars visible along her flanks, long, straight marks that spoke of cruelty rather than accident. Someone in the crowd laughed. "What are they thinking bringing that thing in here?" Another voice joined in. "Ought to put her down, save everyone the trouble." The auctioneer, a weathered man named Dale Hutchins, who'd been running this auction for 30 years, looked uncomfortable. "We've got lot 47 here, a mare. Owner states she's got good bloodlines, just needs some care and feeding, needs a bullet," someone called out. And there was more laughter. Clay felt something twist in his chest. The horse stood in the center of the ring, head low, clearly exhausted. But there was something in the way she held herself, a dignity despite the indignity of her situation, that struck him deep. She wasn't broken in spirit, just in body. Or maybe both, but refusing to surrender completely. He knew that feeling. "Poor thing," Sarah whispered beside him. Who would let a horse get into that condition? Clay didn't answer. He was watching the mare, and she had lifted her head slightly, looking around the ring at the crowd. Her eyes were dark and intelligent, and when her gaze swept past where Clay sat, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Recognition. The bidding started at $500. "No one moved. Come on, folks," Dale tried. "She's young yet, plenty of years left in her with proper care." 300? Silence. The laughter had died down, replaced by an uncomfortable shuffling. The horse was an embarrassment, a reminder that sometimes things got used up and thrown away. $100, Dale said, his voice flat now, going through the motions. "Surely someone—" "50, Clay said. Every head in the building turned to look at him. Sarah grabbed his arm. "Clay, what are you doing?" He didn't know. Couldn't have explained it if someone put a gun to his head. But looking at that horse, broken and mocked and still somehow standing, he saw himself, saw what the world thought of him, and something in him rebelled against it. $50, Dale repeated, relief evident in his voice. "Do I hear 75? The silence stretched out. No one was going to bid against Clay Mercer. Not out of respect. They just didn't want the burden of what that horse represented. 50 going once, twice, sold to bidder 93. Clay felt the weight of every eye in the building. Tom Harrigan had turned around in his seat and was staring up at him with an expression that mixed disbelief and something that might have been concern. "Clay," Sarah said quietly, urgently. "You can't afford—" "I know," he said. "I know I can't," but he was already standing, already making his way down the bleachers toward the cashier's window, where he'd sign papers and write a check that would probably bounce and commit himself to something that made no rational sense at all. As he walked, he passed Tom Harrigan. The banker stood and stepped into his path. "Clay," that was— Tom stopped, searching for words. "That's $50 you don't have to spend on an animal that's probably not worth saving." Clay met his old classmate's eyes. There was genuine concern there, mixed with the professional calculation of a man who held the keys to Clay's future. "Maybe," Clay said. "But I'm going to try anyway." Tom shook his head slowly. "This doesn't change anything. You understand that? You've still got 90 days. "I understand." Tom stepped aside, and Clay continued to the window where a bored clerk took his information and his check. Outside, in the holding pens, he found the mare standing alone in a small corral. Up close, she looked even worse. The scars more pronounced, the way she held her leg more concerning. But when he approached the fence, she lifted her head and looked at him with those intelligent eyes, and he saw it again, that flicker of something that hadn't been completely extinguished. "What have I done?" he muttered to himself. Sarah appeared beside him. She'd followed him out, and now she stood studying the horse with the practiced eye of someone who'd been around them her whole life. "She's in rough shape," Sarah said. "Going to need a vet, probably medication, definitely a lot of feed and care." "You sure about this, Clay?" He wasn't sure about anything, but he'd already made the choice, already written the check. And standing here looking at this broken animal, he felt more present, more alive than he had in months. Even if it was the stupidity of desperation, it was something. "No," he admitted. "But I'm going to do it anyway." Sarah smiled, small and sad and understanding. "What are you going to call her?" Clay looked at the mare, thinking about the emptiness he'd been living in, the hollow place where his life used to be. "Hollow," he said. "Her name's Hollow." Loading Hollow into the trailer took longer than Clay expected. She was skittish around the ramp, and he didn't blame her. Whatever had happened to leave those scars had also left deeper marks on her trust. He stood at the bottom of the ramp, not pushing, just waiting. Sarah had offered to help, but he'd waved her off. This felt like something he needed to do alone. "Easy," he murmured, keeping his voice low and steady. "Nobody's going to hurt you. Not anymore." The mare stood at the edge of the ramp, nostrils flared, every muscle tense. Her ears swiveled forward and back, listening. Clay could see her calculating whether to bolt. He'd seen that look before, in wild horses, in animals that had been broken badly, in his own reflection some mornings. He didn't reach for her, didn't try to force it. Just stood there, one hand resting on the side of the trailer, patient in a way he'd forgotten he could be. It took 15 minutes. Finally, Hollow took one cautious step onto the ramp. The metal rang under her hoof and she froze again. Clay waited. Another step. Another. Then she was in, her body filling the narrow space, her breath coming quick and shallow. "Good girl," Clay said softly, securing the trailer gate behind her. "That's the hardest part done." When he walked around to check on her through the side window, he noticed something he'd missed before. She was wearing a halter, old cracked leather that had rubbed raw spots on her face. Hanging from it was a nameplate, the kind that owners used to identify their horses. But this one was torn nearly in half, the name scratched out and illegible. Someone had tried to erase who she'd been before. The sight of it hit Clay harder than he'd expected. To be so thoroughly discarded that even your name was taken away, that was a particular kind of cruelty. The drive back to the ranch was quiet. The truck's engine rumbled, and the trailer swayed slightly on the turns. Clay kept checking the rearview mirror, watching Hollow try to keep her balance. She didn't fight it, didn't panic, just stood there, swaying with the motion, enduring. The October sun was starting its descent toward the western mountains when Clay pulled onto his property. The long gravel drive stretched out before him, familiar ruts and all. He'd driven this path 10,000 times, as a boy in his father's truck, as a young man in his first pickup, as a husband bringing Eleanor home from the hospital with their newborn son. Every time the land had looked the same, eternal, unchanging, indifferent to human joy or suffering. Today, it looked different. Maybe because he was different. Or maybe because for the first time in years, he was bringing something home, instead of watching things leave. He backed the trailer up to the barn carefully, killed the engine, and sat for a moment in the cab. The reality of what he'd done was settling in now. $50 he didn't have. A horse that needed hundreds, maybe thousands more in vet care and feed. 90 days to save his ranch, and he'd just made his situation worse. Eleanor's voice came to him from memory, as clear as if she were sitting in the passenger seat beside him. "Clay Mercer, you never did have the sense God gave a grasshopper. But your heart's always been bigger than your head." He'd loved her for saying things like that, for seeing his foolishness and loving him anyway. He climbed out of the truck and opened the trailer. Hollow stood where he'd left her, patient and wary. This time, when he lowered the ramp, she walked down without hesitation, as if she understood that whatever came next, it was bound to be better than what she'd left behind. Clay led her into the barn and put her in the stall next to Belle. The old mare nickered a greeting, curious about the newcomer. Zisco, in the stall beyond, merely looked and went back to his hay. Clay filled a bucket with clean water and another with feed, not too much. Her system couldn't handle it after what she'd been through, and set them in the stall. Hollow drank deeply, but barely touched the feed. "Give it time," Clay said. More to himself than to her, he stood there watching her for a long while. The afternoon light slanted through the gaps in the barn walls, laying golden stripes across the floor. Dust motes drifted in the air. The smell of hay and horse and old wood filled his lungs with every breath. This barn had been built by his grandfather's hands, maintained by his father's, and now it was falling apart under his stewardship. Just like everything else, a memory surfaced, sharp and unwelcome, 15 years ago. The rodeo in Great Falls. Clay had been at the peak of his career, 3 championships under his belt, sponsors calling, a reputation as one of the best bronc riders in the state. Eleanor had been in the stands with Marcus, their son, then just 7 years old. Clay had drawn a horse called Widowmaker, a notorious bucker that had thrown every rider in recent memory. He should have been nervous, should have been cautious, but he'd been cocky instead. Thought he was invincible. The ride had started well. Widowmaker had lived up to his name, twisting and bucking with a fury that would have unseated most riders in the first 3 seconds. But Clay had hung on, reading the horse's movements, staying centered. The crowd had been on their feet, roaring, then something went wrong. Widowmaker had pivoted in a direction Clay hadn't anticipated. For just a fraction of a second, Clay's weight shifted too far forward. That was all it took. The horse bucked hard and Clay went flying, his hand still tangled in the rigging. The impact when he hit the ground had been catastrophic. He'd felt his hip shatter, heard it. The pain had been a white supernova that blacked out the world. Widowmaker had kept bucking, dragging Clay behind him, until the riggers finally got his hand free. He'd spent 3 months in the hospital, another 6 in physical therapy. The doctors had said he was lucky to walk again at all. But walking wasn't the same as riding, and riding was who he'd been. Without that, he was nobody. The rodeo circuit had moved on without him. Sponsors had called 1 or 2 more times, then stopped. Friends had visited less and less. Within a year, he was just another has-been, another cautionary tale about pride going before a fall. And everyone had seen it. Everyone had watched him fail spectacularly, publicly. The memory of the crowd's gasp, the sudden silence after the roar, that lived in him still, a humiliation he'd never outrun. Looking at Hollow now, he wondered if she carried similar memories. Moments when everything had gone wrong, when whatever pride or spirit she'd had was broken along with her body. Did horses remember shame? He didn't know, but he suspected they remembered pain, both kinds. As the sun set and shadows filled the barn, Clay pulled up an old stool and sat outside Hollow's stall. He hadn't planned to stay. Had work to do, bills to ignore, a lonely house waiting. But something kept him there. Hollow stood in the center of her stall, not eating, not drinking now, just existing. Every so often she'd shift her weight off her injured leg, and Clay could see the pain in the small movement. "I know how you feel," he said quietly. "Walking around broken, trying to pretend you're not. Trying to remember what it felt like before everything went wrong." The horse's ear swiveled toward him. Listening. "I don't know if I can fix you," Clay continued. The words coming easier in the darkness, talking to an animal that couldn't judge him. "Don't know if I can fix myself either. But maybe we don't have to be fixed. Maybe we just have to be better than we were yesterday." It was a philosophy his grandfather had lived by. Dutch Mercer hadn't been a complicated man, but he'd had simple wisdoms that carried weight. "Don't worry about being perfect, boy," he'd told young Clay 100 times. "Just be better than you were. That's all any of us can do." Clay hadn't thought about that in years, hadn't thought he deserved such simple grace. But sitting here in the gathering dark, watching a broken horse try to stand despite the pain, he felt something shift inside him. Not hope, exactly. That word was too big, too fragile. But something smaller. Possibility, maybe. The faint idea that endings didn't have to be final. "Here's what I think," he said to Hollow. "I think you and I are going to help each other. I don't know how yet. Don't even know if we can. But I bought you for $50, and that makes you mine. And I take care of what's mine. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." Hollow turned her head slightly, looking at him with those dark, intelligent eyes. In the dim light, the scars on her flanks looked like shadows. And for a moment she was just a horse, beautiful in the way all horses were beautiful. Strong and graceful and full of possibility. Clay stood up, his hip protesting the movement. "Tomorrow we'll get the vet out here. Start doing this right. Tonight you just rest. You're safe now. Nobody's going to hurt you here." He walked to the barn door and paused, looking back. Hollow had moved to the water bucket and was drinking again. Long, slow pulls that said she was starting to trust that the water would still be there if she looked away. Clay smiled. A small, tentative expression that felt foreign on his face. Then he walked out into the night, toward the house that held his grandfather's saddle and his dead wife's coffee pot and 90 days' worth of impossible decisions. But for the first time in longer than he could remember, he felt like maybe, just maybe, he had something worth fighting for. Morning came cold and clear. Clay was up before dawn, same as always, but today felt different. He dressed quickly and walked to the barn with more purpose than he'd had in months. Hollow was standing when he arrived, which was a good sign. She'd made it through the night. In daylight, he could see the full extent of her condition. The scars he'd noticed were worse than he'd thought, long welts across her flanks and hindquarters that spoke of repeated beatings. Her ribs protruded sharply through her dull coat. Her right front leg was swollen above the hoof, and when she moved, she barely put weight on it. But worst of all was her eyes. They held the kind of wariness that came from expecting pain, from learning that people were something to fear rather than trust. Clay called Doc Martinez from the house phone. Elena Martinez had been the local large animal vet for 20 years, had treated every horse Clay had ever owned. She was efficient, no nonsense, and didn't judge people for their circumstances. If anyone could help Hollow, it was her. Doc, it's Clay Mercer. I need you to come take a look at a horse. There was a brief pause. Elena knew his situation. Everyone did in a town this size. Clay, if this is about money, I'll figure out the money, he said more firmly than he felt. Just need you to come look at her. She arrived 2 hours later in her truck, with the veterinary logo on the side, pulling up to the barn with practiced ease. Elena was in her early 50s, her dark hair streaked with grey and pulled back in a practical ponytail. She'd delivered Marcus when Eleanor went into labor early, and she'd been there when they had to put down Clay's championship horse after he broke his leg in a gopher hole. She'd seen the Mercer family through births and deaths, and she never brought up more than was necessary. Let's see what we've got, she said. Grabbing her bag from the truck, Clay led her to Hollow's stall. Elena stood silent for a long moment, taking in the horse's condition with a professional eye that missed nothing. Well, she said finally, she's been through it. Can you help her? Elena set down her bag and approached Hollow slowly, talking in a low, calm voice. The mare tensed but didn't bolt. She let Elena run hands over her body, checking the scars, examining the swollen leg, looking at her teeth and eyes. Malnutrition, obviously, Elena said as she worked. This leg has an old injury that wasn't treated properly, might have some tendon damage. These scars are all external, should heal fine. What concerns me most is her weight and her general condition. She's been neglected for a long time. What's it going to take? Elena pulled a notepad from her pocket and started writing. High-quality feed, supplements, gradual increase in portions. You can't just start feeding her normally or you'll make her sick. Antibiotics for this leg infection. Anti-inflammatories for the pain. I want to see her again in 2 weeks. She tore off the page and handed it to Clay. At the bottom was a number that made his stomach drop. $375, and that was just for the initial visit and medications. Doc, He stopped, the words stuck in his throat. Elena looked at him directly, her dark eyes understanding. I know you're in a tight spot, Clay. I can put you on a payment plan. $50 a month for now. When you're back on your feet, we'll sort out the rest. The kindness in her offer made it harder somehow. He wanted to say yes, wanted to take the help. But pride was a hard thing to swallow even when you were drowning. I appreciate that, he managed. This horse is young enough that with proper care, she should make a full recovery. Might take 6 months, maybe longer, but she's got good bones under all that rough treatment. Elena packed up her bag. You did a good thing, Clay. Not many people would have taken her on. After Eleanor left, Clay stood looking at the bill in his hand. $375. He had maybe $200 in his account, and that was supposed to cover feed and utilities for the month. But Hollow needed these medications, needed the care. He was still standing there when Sarah's truck pulled up. She climbed out carrying a bag of feed supplements and some grooming supplies. Saw Doc Martinez leaving, she said. Thought you might need these. Clay looked at the supplies, then at Sarah. She'd lost her husband, was managing her own ranch alone, had her own struggles. And here she was, bringing him things he couldn't afford because she knew he needed them. "Sarah, I can't." "Yes, you can." Her voice was firm but gentle. "Let people help you, Clay. It doesn't make you weak." He took the supplies, his throat tight. "Thank you." They spent the next hour together, Sarah showing him how to mix the supplements into Hollow's feed, demonstrating the gentle grooming techniques that would help the horse learn to trust again. Sarah had always been good with animals, patient in a way that Clay admired. "Talk to her while you work," Sarah said, running a soft brush over Hollow's neck. "Let her hear your voice. Get used to you being close without hurting her." Clay tried it, feeling foolish at first, talking to a horse about nothing in particular. But Hollow's ears swiveled toward him, listening, and gradually her muscles relaxed under the brush. "That's it," Sarah encouraged. "You're doing fine." When Sarah left, Clay continued the work alone. He cleaned Hollow's stall thoroughly, laid down fresh bedding, made sure she had clean water and the right amount of feed. Small tasks, but they felt significant. Each one was a step toward healing, for both of them. Over the next few days, a routine emerged. Morning feeding, gentle grooming, quiet conversation. Clay found himself talking to Hollow about things he'd never said out loud to anyone. About Eleanor and how much he missed her. About Marcus and the distance between them. About the ranch and his fear of losing it. The horse never judged, never offered advice. She just listened, and somehow that was enough. Word spread through town about Clay's purchase. It was inevitable in a place where everyone's business was community property. Some people thought he was foolish, others pitied him. A few respected what he was trying to do. Clay heard the gossip when he went to the feed store, saw the looks when he passed people on the street. Tom Harrigan stopped by on the fourth day. Clay saw the bank's SUV pull up and felt his jaw tighten. Tom got out carrying an envelope, never a good sign. Clay. Tom's greeting was professional, distant. "Tom, I'm here in an official capacity." Tom handed him the envelope. 90-day notice. If you can't make the payment by January 15th, the bank will begin foreclosure proceedings. Clay took the envelope without opening it. "I know." Tom looked past him toward the barn, where Hollow was visible in her stall. "People are talking about that horse. About you spending money you don't have. Let them talk. Clay, I'm trying to help you here. You need to be realistic. That horse is a money pit, and you're already buried." "The smart thing would be..." "The smart thing," Clay interrupted, his voice hard, "would have been a lot of things I didn't do over the years. But I bought her."
"She's mine."
"And I'm going to see it through." Tom sighed, and for a moment the banker facade slipped, revealing the friend he used to be. "I'm not the enemy here, Clay. I know it feels like it, but I'm not. I'm just doing my job." "I know." And Clay did know, which made it harder. Tom wasn't being cruel. He was being practical. The problem was that Clay's whole life had been impractical choices, and he was too old to start being sensible now. After Tom left, Clay opened the envelope. The formal language spelled out what he already knew. $48,000 by mid-January. Impossible numbers, representing an impossible situation. He walked to the barn and found Hollow eating from her feed bucket. A small thing, but it mattered. She was eating regularly now, putting on weight slowly but steadily. When Clay approached, she looked up but didn't shy away. He held out his hand, palm flat, some feed pellets resting on it. "Come on, girl. You can trust me," Hollow considered. Clay could see the calculation in her eyes, the old fear warring with new possibility. He waited patient, his hand steady. Then she stepped forward, careful on her healing leg, and lowered her head. Her soft muzzle touched his palm, whiskers tickling his skin. She took the feed gently, her breath warm against his hand. It was such a small victory, just a horse eating from his hand. But standing there in the barn that was falling apart, holding the foreclosure notice in one pocket and a veterinary bill he couldn't afford in the other, Clay felt something break open in his chest. Not hope, not yet, but the space where hope might grow. "We're going to figure this out," he told Hollow, stroking her neck as she chewed. "I don't know how yet, but we will." The horse leaned into his touch just slightly, and Clay took that as agreement. They were both broken. both running out of time. But they had each other now, and that had to count for something. The weeks settled into a rhythm. Clay rose before dawn, started coffee, and headed to the barn. Feed Hollow first, then Cisco and Belle fresh water, gentle grooming that had become as much meditation as maintenance. He'd talk while he worked, his voice low and steady, telling Hollow about the weather, about repairs he needed to make, about nothing and everything. The mare was responding. Her weight was coming back, ribs less prominent now. The swelling in her leg had gone down, and while she still favored it, she could walk without that heartbreaking limp. Her coat was developing a shine it hadn't had before, and when Clay approached her stall each morning, she'd nicker softly in greeting. One evening, cleaning out the tack room, Clay found an old box of photographs he'd forgotten about. He sat down on a hay bale and opened it, dust motes dancing in the last rays of sunlight through the barn door. The top photo stopped him cold. It was him, 25 years younger, standing in an arena holding a championship belt high above his head. He was grinning, that cocky, confident smile of a man who thought he was invincible. His other arm was around Eleanor, who was pregnant with Marcus, her face radiant with pride and joy. Behind them, barely visible in the crowd, was his father, Dutch Mercer's son, who died just a year before this photo was taken. Clay remembered that day with painful clarity. The Montana State Championship team roping division. He and his partner, Jimmy Caldwell, had posted the fastest time in 20 years. The crowd had gone wild. Sponsors had lined up afterward, money and opportunities flowing like water. He'd been 29 years old, and the world had belonged to him. He traced Eleanor's face with his finger, remembering how she'd kissed him that day, told him she knew he'd win, that she'd always known. She'd believed in him in a way he'd never quite believed in himself. And when she died of cancer 8 years ago, she'd taken that belief with her. Marcus had been there that day too, growing in Eleanor's belly, not yet born into a world where his father was somebody. By the time Marcus was old enough to understand what rodeo was, Clay had already fallen. The boy had grown up knowing his father as a failure, had watched him sink into bitterness and debt. No wonder Marcus had left as soon as he could, moved to Billings, and barely called anymore. Clay set the photo aside and picked up another. This one showed him on horseback mid-ride, his form perfect. He'd been good. Not just competent, actually good. He'd understood horses in a way that went beyond technique, had felt their movements as if they were his own. Where had that gone? When had he stopped trusting that connection? His phone rang, startling him from his memories. He pulled it from his pocket and saw Marcus's name on the screen. Speak of the devil. They hadn't talked in 3 months, not since a tense conversation about Clay selling the ranch and moving into town. He answered, "Marcus." "Dad." His son's voice was careful, distant. "Just checking in. Wanted to see how you're doing." "I'm fine." A pause. "I heard about the horse. Mrs. Henderson mentioned it when I called her store for Mom's old recipe." Of course, someone had told him. The gossip network in small towns worked faster than any internet. "Yeah, I bought a horse," Clay said, defensive without meaning to be. "Dad, can you afford—" Marcus stopped, sighed. "Never mind. It's your money. It's not about the money. Then what's it about?" Clay looked at the photograph still in his hand, at the man he used to be. "Second chances, maybe?" "I don't know." Another pause, longer this time. "I was thinking about coming for a visit. Maybe next month." The offer surprised Clay. "You don't have to do that." "I know I don't have to." "I want to." Marcus's voice softened slightly. "It's been a while." "Yeah, it has." They talked for a few more minutes. Awkward, formal conversation that skirted around everything that mattered. But when Clay hung up, he felt something he hadn't expected. A small opening, perhaps. A possibility of repair. Sarah came by the next afternoon with a casserole and news that the Frontier Challenge was accepting registrations for next spring. The annual competition brought riders from across 3 states to compete in various events that tested horsemanship, skill, and the bond between horse and rider. "You should enter," she said, setting the casserole on Clay's kitchen counter. He laughed without humor. "Sarah, I haven't competed in 15 years. And Hollow's barely back on her feet. I'm not saying tomorrow, but it's 6 months away. Think about it. She leaned against the counter, her expression serious. You need something to work toward, Clay. Something beyond just surviving day to day. Even if I wanted to, which I don't. The entry fee alone is $500. Prize money's good, but the chances of winning aren't about the money, Sarah interrupted. It's about remembering who you are, who you were before the accident, before Eleanor died, before you decided you were finished. Her words hit harder than he wanted to admit. What if I fail? What if I get out there and prove everyone right, that I'm washed up, that I should have stayed buried? What if you don't? She met his eyes. What if you surprise yourself? After she left, Clay couldn't stop thinking about it. The Frontier Challenge. He'd competed 3 times before the accident, placed in the top 5 twice. The course tested everything: speed, precision, the kind of partnership with your horse that couldn't be faked. That evening, he went to the barn with his grandfather's old saddle. He'd avoided using it, hadn't put it on a horse in years. It felt like tempting fate, invoking a legacy he'd tarnished. But looking at Hollow, seeing how far she'd come, he felt something stir. What do you think, girl? You up for trying something new? Hollow watched him approach with the saddle, her ears forward, curious. Clay moved slowly, talking the whole time, letting her see and smell the tack. She tensed when he settled it on her back, but didn't bolt. He cinched it gently, checking her reaction at every step. When he led her out to the small corral behind the barn, his heart was pounding. This was foolish. She wasn't ready. He wasn't ready. But his hand was already on the saddle horn, his foot finding the stirrup. Hollow stood perfectly still as he swung into the saddle, taking his weight. For a moment they both froze, man and horse, broken things finding balance together. Then Clay nudged her gently forward, and she walked. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't the smooth partnership he'd once had with championship horses. But it was movement, it was possibility, and sitting in his grandfather's saddle on a horse that everyone had given up on. Clay felt something he'd thought was lost forever. He felt alive. They made one slow circuit of the corral. Just walking, nothing fancy. But when Clay dismounted, his hands were shaking and his eyes were wet. "Good girl," he whispered, pressing his forehead against Hollow's neck. "You beautiful, brave girl." Sarah's words echoed in his mind. Something to work toward. The Frontier Challenge was 6 months away. Registration deadline was in 2 months. The entry fee was impossible. The idea was crazy, but what if? Over the next weeks, Clay began training in earnest. Just light work at first, walking then trotting, building Hollow's strength and trust. She responded like she'd been waiting for this, for someone to see her potential instead of her past. Every day she was stronger, more confident. The town noticed. When Clay went to the feed store, people watched differently now. Some still thought he was deluded, throwing good money after bad. But others, especially the older ranchers who remembered when Clay was somebody, they'd nod with something that might have been respect. Sarah helped when she could, though Clay began noticing the strain around her eyes, the way her shoulders stayed tight. One afternoon, after they'd finished working with Hollow, he asked her about it. "I'm fine," she said, unconvincing. "Sarah." She looked away, toward the mountains. "The developers made another offer on my place. Higher this time. You're not selling. I might have to." Her voice was quiet. "Frank left more debt than I knew about. The ranch isn't making enough to cover it. These developers want to build some resort property. Says they'll pay triple what the land's worth for ranching." Clay felt a surge of anger, not at Sarah, but at the unfairness of it all. They were both hanging on by threads, both trying to keep legacies alive that the world had moved past. "Don't do it yet," he said. "Give it time. Maybe something will work out," she smiled sadly. "Like what? A miracle?" "Maybe." He looked at Hollow, grazing peacefully in the corral. "Sometimes broken things fix each other. Sometimes what looks impossible isn't." Sarah reached over and squeezed his hand. "When did you become an optimist?" "I'm not. I'm just—" He paused, searching for the right words. "I'm just not quite ready to quit yet." That night, alone in the house, Clay pulled out the registration form for the Frontier Challenge. He stared at it for a long time, pen in hand. $500 he didn't have. A competition he probably couldn't win. A horse that might not be ready. All the sensible reasons said no, but the photo of the man he used to be said something different. And Hollow, who'd come back from the edge of nothing, who trusted him now despite every reason not to, she said something different too. Clay signed his name on the form and sealed it in an envelope before he could change his mind. He'd figure out the entry fee somehow. He'd train Hollow the best he could, and come spring, he'd ride into that arena one more time. Not because he expected to win, but because some things were worth trying for, even when, especially when, success seemed impossible. Winter came early that year, rolling down from Canada with ice and wind that turned the ranch into something stark and beautiful. Clay mailed the registration form for the Frontier Challenge the day before the first snow, paying the entry fee with money he'd scraped together, selling an old tractor that had been rusting behind the barn. Tom Harrigan would have said it was throwing good money after bad. Clay tried not to think about what Tom Harrigan would say. The training became the center of his days. Morning sessions in the corral, working on basic maneuvers. Afternoon sessions focused on trust exercises, teaching Hollow to respond to subtle cues, building the kind of partnership that made horse and rider move as one unit. Evening sessions were gentler, just quiet time together, grooming and talking. Sarah stopped by most afternoons, offering advice and encouragement. She'd competed in barrel racing in her younger days and knew the mental game as well as the physical one. "You're too tense," she'd say, watching Clay work Hollow through a serpentine pattern. "She can feel it. You've got to trust her the same way you're asking her to trust you." Easier said than done. Clay had spent 15 years not trusting much of anything, least of all himself. But he tried, consciously relaxing his grip, breathing deeper, letting Hollow make decisions instead of forcing her into every movement. The work was harder than he'd remembered. His body, 20 years older and still carrying the damage from the accident, protested daily. His hip ached in the cold. His back spasmed when he spent too long in the saddle. But there was something clarifying about physical pain. It was simple, direct, easier to bear than the complicated ache of grief and regret he'd been carrying. One morning, working through his memories while cleaning Hollow's stall, Clay found himself thinking about Eleanor's final days. The cancer had been aggressive, moving through her body like wildfire, despite treatments that left her weak and hollowed out. She'd faced it with a courage that shamed him, had kept her humor and grace even as death became inevitable. The last night, in the hospital, she'd gripped his hand with what little strength remained. "You take care of Marcus," she'd said, "and you take care of yourself. Promise me you won't just disappear into that ranch and give up." He'd promised. He'd broken that promise the day they buried her. Marcus had needed him then. A 20-year-old losing his mother, watching his father crumble. Instead of stepping up, Clay had retreated. Stopped answering calls, stopped making an effort, stopped being present for anything that mattered. By the time he'd surfaced enough to realize what he'd done, Marcus was gone. Living in Billings, building a life that didn't include his father. 8 years. He'd had 8 years to fix it and hadn't. Had let pride and shame keep him from reaching out, from admitting he'd failed his son the same way he'd failed everything else. The sound of an engine broke through his thoughts. Clay looked up to see an unfamiliar truck coming up the drive. When it parked and the driver got out, his heart lurched. Marcus, his son, had his mother's eyes and Clay's stubborn jaw. At 28, he'd grown into a man Clay barely recognized. Tall, confident, dressed in the business casual clothes of someone who worked in an office instead of a ranch. He looked successful. He looked nothing like Clay. Marcus. Clay set down his shovel, suddenly aware of how he must look. Dirty jeans, worn coat, a man who smelled of horse and hay. "Hey, Dad?" Marcus's smile was uncertain. "Thought I'd take you up on that visit." They stood there for an awkward moment, the distance between them measured in more than just feet. Finally, Clay gestured toward the house. "Come on in. I'll make coffee." Inside, the house showed its neglect. Dishes in the sink, dust on the surfaces. The general air of a place where no one was really living, just existing. Marcus looked around, and Clay saw his own failure reflected in his son's eyes. "Place looks the same," Marcus said. which was generous. Clay made coffee, and they sat at the kitchen table where Eleanor had once presided over family dinners and homework sessions and all the ordinary magic of life. Now it was just two men who happened to share blood and history, searching for common ground, training a horse. "I heard," Marcus said finally. "Yeah, for the Frontier Challenge in the spring." Marcus's expression was carefully neutral. That's ambitious." "Probably stupid is what you mean." "I didn't say that. You thought it." Clay sipped his coffee, the old defensiveness rising up. "Everyone thinks it. Old Clay Mercer can't accept he's washed up, throwing away money he doesn't have on a horse that's as broken as he is." Marcus set his cup down with more force than necessary. "You know what? Yeah, I do think it's stupid. The bank's about to foreclose on this place. You can barely afford to feed yourself, and you're training for a competition you haven't even qualified for in 15 years. It's not ambitious, Dad, it's denial." The words hit like physical blows, sharp and accurate. Clay felt his jaw tighten. "Then why are you here?" "Because I'm trying—" Marcus stopped, took a breath. "I'm trying to have a relationship with my only living parent. I'm trying to convince you to be realistic before you lose everything. Grandpa's ranch, everything he built, it's all gonna disappear because you're too proud to admit when you're beat. Your grandfather never quit on anything in his life. Grandpa knew when to hold 'em and when to fold 'em." Marcus shot back. He was practical. You're chasing ghosts, Dad. Mom's gone. Your rodeo career's gone. This ranch is going the same way, whether you want to admit it or not." Clay stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "If you came here to tell me to give up, you've wasted a trip. I came here to tell you the truth. Someone has to." Marcus stood too, facing his father across the table. "Sell the ranch. It's worth more than what you owe. You could clear your debts, have money left over, start fresh somewhere that doesn't remind you of everything you lost. This is my home. This is a monument to the past." Marcus's voice cracked slightly. "You've been living in the past for 8 years. Ever since Mom died, you've been disappearing into this place, into your grief, into your failures. And I've watched it happen, and I didn't do anything because I was angry at you for not being there when I needed you. But I'm not angry anymore. I'm tired of watching you destroy yourself. The truth of it settled in the space between them." Clay had no defense because Marcus was right. "About all of it. You want to see the horse?" Clay asked finally, his voice rough. Marcus looked surprised. "What?" "The horse, Hollow. You want to see what I'm wasting my time and money on?" They walked to the barn in silence. Cisco and Belle nickered greetings, but Clay led Marcus to Hollow's stall. The mare was standing near the back, and when she saw them, she walked forward, curious and confident in a way that would have been impossible 2 months ago. "This is her," Clay said. "This is what everyone says I'm foolish for buying." Marcus looked at the horse, and Clay saw his son's expression soften slightly. "She looks healthy now. She wasn't when I got her. She was starving, beaten, lame. Everyone at the auction was laughing at her. Said she should be put down." Clay put his hand on the stall door, and Hollow came to him, pressing her nose against his palm. "But she wasn't broken, Marcus. Just hurt. There's a difference, Dad. I know what this looks like from the outside. I know it seems like I'm being stubborn and stupid. Maybe I am." Clay stroked Hollow's face, the horse leaning into his touch with complete trust. "But when I look at her, I see second chances. I see that maybe it's not too late to be something other than a failure." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer. "You're not a failure, aren't I? Lost my career, lost my wife, lost my relationship with my son, about to lose my home. What would you call it? Human." Marcus came closer, reached out tentatively to touch Hollow's neck. The horse allowed it, her dark eyes calm. "You're human, Dad. You had things go wrong that weren't your fault. Mom getting sick, that wasn't your fault. The accident was entirely my fault. I was cocky, thought I was invincible. You were doing what you loved." Marcus pulled his hand back, looked at his father. "When did you stop allowing yourself that? When did everything become about what you lost instead of what you still have?" The question hung between them, unanswerable. Clay had no idea when he'd made that transition, from grieving to drowning. It had happened slowly, then all at once. "I should go," Marcus said finally. "I've got meetings tomorrow, need to drive back tonight." They walked to Marcus's truck together. Before getting in, Marcus turned back. "I meant what I said, about wanting a relationship. But I need you to meet me halfway. That means being honest about your situation. That means accepting help when you need it." "I'm trying," Clay said. It was the most honest thing he could offer. Try harder. But Marcus said it without anger, almost gently. "And Dad? Good luck with the competition." "I mean that." After Marcus drove away, Clay stood in the gathering dusk, feeling hollowed out. The conversation had torn open wounds he'd tried to keep sealed, had forced him to look at truths he'd been avoiding. He walked back to the barn, to Hollow's stall. The mare came to the door immediately, sensing his distress in that way horses had. Clay pressed his forehead against her neck, breathing in the clean smell of horse and hay. "He's right, you know," Clay murmured. "About all of it. I'm chasing ghosts. I'm being stubborn. This whole thing, you, the competition, all of it. It's probably just another way to avoid facing reality." Hollow nickered softly, a sound of comfort and understanding. "But I can't quit. I don't know how anymore. And maybe that makes me a fool, but it's all I've got left." He stayed there for a long time, drawing strength from the horse's solid presence. When he finally pulled away, Hollow was looking at him with those intelligent eyes, and Clay could have sworn he saw something like encouragement there. "All right," he said, more to himself than to her. "All right, let's prove them wrong, or die trying." The words were meant to be defiant, but they came out tired, uncertain. Clay returned to the house, to the empty rooms, and the silence that Eleanor's absence had left behind. He sat at the kitchen table and looked at the registration confirmation for the Frontier Challenge. 6 months until he'd stand in that arena. 6 months to train a broken horse and fix a broken man. 6 months to do the impossible. It was foolish. It was probably futile, but it was the only thing he had that felt like moving forward, instead of slowly sinking under the weight of everything he'd lost. The week after Marcus's visit, Clay threw himself into the training with renewed intensity. If he was going to fail, it wouldn't be for lack of trying. He and Hollow worked through increasingly complex patterns, figure eights, quick turns, the kind of responsive partnership that the Frontier Challenge would demand. The mare was proving herself far beyond what anyone could have expected. She had natural talent buried under the trauma, a willingness to work that spoke of intelligence and heart. One afternoon, searching for an old training manual he vaguely remembered storing somewhere, Clay found himself in the back corner of the tack room he rarely ventured into. Behind a dusty box of spare bits and bridles, he spotted a leather-bound book he didn't recognize. When he pulled it out and opened it, his breath caught. Eleanor's handwriting filled the pages. Her journal. He'd forgotten about it, or maybe he'd blocked it out, one more painful reminder filed away where it couldn't hurt him. His hands trembled slightly as he turned to the first entry. The date was from 12 years ago, before the cancer, when life was still normal. "Clay's training a new horse today," she'd written. "He has this way with them, so patient and kind. I wish he could see himself the way I see him, strong and capable and good. He carries his father's shadow like a weight, always worried he's not measuring up to Dutch's legacy. But he's building his own legacy, and it's beautiful." Clay sat down hard on a hay bale, the journal clutched in his hands. He'd never known Eleanor had written about him, had documented their life together in these pages. He turned ahead, skimming entries about Marcus's school concerts, about the ranch, about ordinary days that had seemed unremarkable at the time, but now shimmered with the preciousness of things lost. Then he found an entry from the hospital, dated 3 days before she died. Her handwriting was shakier here, the letters less certain, but the words were clear. "I'm afraid of leaving Clay alone. Not because I doubt his strength, but because I know how much he'll hurt. He'll want to bury himself in that pain, let it define him. But that's not who he is. Clay is a man who sees broken things and makes them whole. He did it with horses, with this ranch, with me when I thought I'd never love again, after my first heartbreak. I need him to remember that about himself. Second chances aren't just for other people, they're for him too." If he's reading this someday, if he's found this journal and I'm gone, I want him to know it's not too late. It's never too late to come back from the edge. I believe in him. I always have. Clay read the passage 3 times, tears streaming down his face that he didn't bother to wipe away. Eleanor had known, had seen the path he would take, the way grief would pull him under, and she'd left these words like a lighthouse beam cutting through fog. It's not too late. He closed the journal carefully and stood up, feeling something shift inside him. Not healing. He wasn't naive enough to think one moment could undo years of damage. But a direction, perhaps. A reason to try that went beyond stubbornness or pride. Eleanor had believed in second chances, had believed in him. The least he could do was try to prove her right. That afternoon's training session with Hollow was different. Clay rode with a focus he hadn't felt since before the accident, pushing them both, but not with desperation, with purpose. They worked through the barrel pattern Sarah had set up, Hollow responding to the slightest pressure from his legs, the gentlest touch of the reins. They moved together, and for brief moments Clay felt what he'd lost all those years ago, the joy of it, the pure connection between horse and rider. Sarah watched from the fence, and when they finished she was grinning. That's it. That's what I've been waiting to see. You two look like one being out there. She's ready, Clay said, dismounting and stroking Hollow's sweaty neck. More than ready. She's going to be something special. She already is. Sarah climbed down from the fence. Clay, can I ask you something? If you don't mind helping an old friend with a problem? Of course. She explained the situation with the developers more fully. They were offering enough money to clear her debts and then some, but she'd have to be off the property within 60 days. They wanted to break ground on their resort by spring. If she refused, they'd made veiled threats about using eminent domain or other legal maneuvers. I don't know what to do, Sarah admitted. Frank would have fought them. But I'm tired, Clay. I don't know if I have another fight in me. Clay thought about Eleanor's words. About seeing broken things and making them whole. What if we fought them together? What do you mean? I mean, I've got some time before my foreclosure deadline. We could research, talk to lawyers, see if there's a way to push back on this. You shouldn't have to give up your home because some developers want to turn Montana into a tourist attraction. Sarah looked at him for a long moment, then smiled. When did you become someone who helps people instead of hiding from them? Recently, Clay admitted. Very recently. And I'm still not good at it. But I'm trying. Over the next weeks, Clay and Sarah became a team. When they weren't training horses, they were researching property law, making calls to environmental groups who might have an interest in blocking development, connecting with other ranchers facing similar pressures. It felt good to fight for something beyond himself, to have a purpose that extended past his own survival. The community was starting to notice the changes, too. At the feed store, old-timers would ask about Hollow, about the training. Some were genuinely interested. Others were skeptical but curious. Word spread that Clay Mercer was making a comeback, and people had opinions about it. Tom Harrigan showed up on a cold February morning, his expression grim. Clay saw him coming and met him at the porch, keeping the banker from entering the house, like he could keep the news at bay. Clay. Tom pulled out his ever-present clipboard. I'm here about the deadline. I know. January 15th. $48,000. You're 3 weeks out. I need to know if you can make it. Clay took a breath, gambling everything on honesty. No, I can't make it. Not by then. But I'm asking you for an extension. Tom's expression didn't change. The bank doesn't usually grant extensions without, I'm entered in the Frontier Challenge, Clay interrupted. First prize is $50,000. Enough to clear my debt with money left over? The competition's in April. I'm asking you to wait until then. Clay, that's asking for 4 more months. And banking on you winning a competition you haven't competed in for over a decade. I know the odds. I'm asking anyway. Tom looked past him toward the barn, where Hollow was visible in the corral. That horse, she's really something, isn't she? I've seen the videos people are posting online. Clay hadn't known people were posting videos. Small towns and social media, nothing stayed private. She's special, Clay agreed. We both are in our own broken way. and we deserve a chance to prove it." Tom was quiet for a long moment, and Clay could see him weighing banker logic against old friendship, professional responsibility against human compassion. Finally, he sighed. "I'll talk to the board. I can't promise anything, but I'll try to get you until May 1st. That's 2 weeks after your competition. But Clay, if you can't pay, we're done. No more extensions. The foreclosure proceeds immediately." "Understood." "Understood. Thank you, Tom." After Tom left, Clay felt both relieved and terrified. He'd bought himself time, but at the cost of raising the stakes even higher. Now he had to compete, had to do well, had to win or lose everything. The pressure affected his training. 2 days later, working Hollow through a difficult quick-turn sequence, Clay pushed too hard. She responded gamely but stumbled coming out of a tight barrel turn, her old injury flaring up. She didn't fall, caught herself, but the limp was back and she was favoring the leg again. Clay dismounted immediately, his heart in his throat. "Easy, girl, easy." He checked the leg carefully, feeling for heat or swelling. It wasn't bad, just overworked, aggravated by his pushing. But the setback felt catastrophic. They didn't have time for injuries, didn't have room for mistakes. He led Hollow back to the barn, doctored her leg with anti-inflammatory gel, and put her in her stall with strict orders to himself not to work her for at least 3 days. Then he sat outside the stall, his head in his hands, doubt crushing down on him. What was he doing? He was 54 years old with a bad hip and fading skills. Hollow was a rescue horse with a history of abuse and a leg that might never be fully sound. They were both broken things, playing at being whole, and the Frontier Challenge would expose that truth in front of hundreds of people. Marcus was right. He was chasing ghosts, refusing to accept reality. That night, alone in the house, Clay sat at the kitchen table with Eleanor's journal open in front of him. He'd been reading entries every evening, savoring her voice, her perspective on their life together. Tonight, he turned to one from the week before her diagnosis. "Clay's convinced he has to be perfect," she'd written. "Has to live up to his father's legacy, his grandfather's reputation. I keep trying to tell him that legacy isn't about being perfect. It's about trying, about caring, about refusing to give up on the things and people that matter. Our legacy isn't the ribbons on the wall or the size of the ranch. It's how we love, how we persevere, how we face the hard things with courage even when we're terrified." I wish he could see that. Wish he could see himself the way I see him. Already enough, already worthy, already exactly who he's supposed to be. Clay closed the journal gently, those words settling into him like seeds finding soil. Already enough, already worthy. He thought about Hollow, lying in her stall with a sore leg, still healing, still imperfect. She didn't need to be perfect to be worthy of love and care. She just needed to be trying, to be surviving, to be taking each day as it came. Maybe he didn't need to be perfect either. Maybe he just needed to keep trying, keep showing up, keep putting one foot in front of the other even when the path was uncertain. The Frontier Challenge wasn't about proving he was the man he used to be. It was about discovering what kind of man he could become, starting from where he actually was instead of where he wished he'd been. "All right, Eleanor," he said quietly to the empty room. "I'm going to try. I'm going to actually try, not just go through the motions. And if I fail, at least I'll fail honestly." Outside, through the window, he could see the barn silhouetted against the winter sky. Inside, Hollow was resting, healing, preparing for what came next. They were both broken. They were both trying, and for tonight, that was enough. Spring arrived grudgingly in Montana, winter releasing its grip one stubborn day at a time. The snow melted into mud, and the mud dried into the hard-packed earth that Clay had known all his life. The Frontier Challenge was 1 week away, and Clay felt simultaneously ready and completely unprepared. Hollow had recovered fully from her setback. More than recovered, she'd come back stronger, as if the brief rest had allowed something in her to settle and solidify. Their training sessions now looked like the partnership Clay had once taken for granted with championship horses. She anticipated his cues, responded to the slightest shift of his weight, moved with a grace that belied her rough history. The mail truck came late on Tuesday afternoon. Clay was in the barn when he heard it, and normally he'd let the mail sit until evening. Bills and advertisements, nothing that couldn't wait. But something made him walk to the mailbox, and there among the usual envelopes was a thick packet from the Frontier Challenge organizers. He opened it standing there by the road, pulling out the contents with hands that had developed calluses again from months of work. The first sheet was standard, confirmation of his entry, competition schedule, rules and regulations. But the second sheet made him stop cold. Special announcement. This year's Frontier Challenge will include a new element in the final round. In addition to the traditional timed events, competitors will face an obstacle course specifically designed to test the bond between horse and rider. This course will emphasize trust, emotional connection, and what we're calling heart over skill. Technical perfection will matter less than genuine partnership. Further details will be provided at the mandatory rider meeting the evening before competition. Clay read it 3 times. Heart over skill. Emotional connection. Everything was different now. The competition he'd been training for had fundamentally changed, and he had 1 week to adapt. He walked back to the house in a daze, trying to process what this meant. Traditional competition favored technical precision, speed, the kind of practiced perfection that came from years of experience. This new element, it leveled the playing field in ways he didn't fully understand yet. But it also played to exactly what he and Hollow had been building. Trust born from shared brokenness, connection forged in healing. He was still sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the announcement when he heard a truck pull up. Through the window, he saw an old Ford that he recognized but couldn't quite place. When the driver stepped out, Clay's breath caught. Ray Hutchins. Ray had been his father's best friend, had trained Clay when he was just starting out in rodeo. He'd been there for all of Clay's championships, had been in the hospital after the accident, had attended Eleanor's funeral. But Clay hadn't seen him in at least 5 years, one more relationship he'd let atrophy through neglect and shame. Clay met him at the door. Ray looked older, his weathered face carrying more lines, his shoulders slightly stooped. But his eyes were still sharp, still kind. Ray, Clay. Ray's smile was tentative. Heard you needed some help preparing for the challenge. Thought I'd offer my services. How did you? Small town. Word gets around. Ray glanced toward the barn. That the famous horse everyone's talking about? They walked together to Hollow's stall. The mare came to the door immediately, curious about the stranger. Ray stood watching her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. She's a beauty, he said finally. Looks like she's had a hard road. She has. But she's come through it. Ray reached out slowly, letting Hollow smell his hand before touching her. The horse allowed it, pressing her nose into Ray's palm. Clay, I need to tell you something. Something I probably should have mentioned sooner. Clay waited, sensing this was important. I'm the one who's been helping with your vet bills. Not all of them, but some. Doc Martinez and I worked out an arrangement. Ray, I don't understand. Why would you? Because I knew this horse. Not personally, but I knew her owner. A young rider named Jesse Thornton. Ray's voice was heavy with old grief. Jesse was 17, one of the most talented riders I'd ever seen. Had a connection with horses that was almost supernatural. And Hollow here, she was his horse. He raised her from a foal, trained her himself. They were a team. Clay felt something cold settle in his stomach. What happened? Car accident 2 years ago. Jesse was driving home from a competition he'd won, actually, and a drunk driver crossed the center line, killed him instantly. Ray's hand remained steady on Hollow's neck, but his eyes were wet. Jesse's parents couldn't deal with the horse. She reminded them too much of what they'd lost. They sold her to a dealer who didn't care about her history, who just saw another animal to flip for profit. That dealer sold her to someone else, and so on down the line. Each owner worse than the last. That's why she was so broken, Clay said, understanding flooding through him. It wasn't just abuse. It was grief. Horses bond deep, Clay, you know that. Jesse was her whole world, and then he was just gone. Everything that happened after, all the neglect and cruelty, it was like the world confirming what she already believed. That everyone leaves, that trust is for fools. Clay looked at Hollow with new eyes. All this time, he'd thought he was saving a horse from physical trauma. But she'd been carrying an invisible wound, a loss that mirrored his own so closely it made his chest ache. "Why didn't you buy her yourself when you found out she was in that auction?" Clay asked. Ray smiled sadly. "I tried. Got there late, missed the bidding. When I heard you'd bought her for $50, I thought maybe it was meant to be. You and her, both grieving, both broken by loss. Maybe you could heal each other in ways I couldn't. You've been watching out for us this whole time. Jesse was like a grandson to me." Helping his horse felt like honoring his memory. Ray turned to face Clay fully. "And you're like a son. Your father and I were brothers in all but blood. Watching you fade away these past years has been hard. When I heard you'd bought Hollow, started training again, it felt like maybe you were coming back to the living." They stood in silence for a moment, processing everything that had been said. Then Clay pulled out the announcement from the Frontier Challenge and handed it to Ray. Ray read it, a slow smile spreading across his weathered face. "Well now, this changes things, doesn't it? I don't even know where to start." "Yes, you do." Ray gestured to Hollow. "You've already been doing it. You've been building exactly the kind of bond this competition is looking for. You just need to trust it now." Over the next days, Ray became a constant presence at the ranch. He watched Clay and Hollow train, offering advice that came from decades of experience and a deep understanding of how horses thought and felt. But more than technique, Ray taught Clay how to let go. "You're still trying to control everything," Ray said during one session. "Still worried about making mistakes, looking foolish. But this new competition format, it's about partnership, not domination. You need to trust Hollow to make decisions, to respond from her instincts and training rather than just your commands." It was harder than Clay expected, relinquishing that control. But Ray was patient, talking him through it, helping him understand that trust was a two-way street. They worked on exercises that built emotional connection rather than just technical skill. Ray set up scenarios that required Hollow to trust Clay completely, walking over tarps that crinkled and moved, crossing through water, standing still while loud noises happened around her. Each exercise was designed to deepen their bond, to prove to Hollow that Clay would never ask her to do something that would harm her. In return, Clay had to trust Hollow, had to believe that she'd respond, that she wouldn't panic or bolt, that the months of healing and training had created something real and reliable. Sarah came by most evenings, bringing food and moral support. She and Ray got along immediately, two people who'd lived full lives and understood the weight of loss. They'd sit on Clay's porch after training sessions, drinking coffee and talking about everything and nothing. "You're going to do fine," Sarah told Clay one evening. "Better than fine. You and Hollow, you got something special, or we'll fail spectacularly in front of half the state. Even if you do," Ray interjected, "you'll have tried. That counts for something." The phone rang inside the house. Clay almost let it go to voicemail, but something made him get up and answer it. Marcus's name showed on the caller ID. "Hey, Dad." Marcus's voice was warmer than Clay had heard in years. "Just wanted to call and wish you luck. The competition's this weekend, right?" "Yeah, Saturday. I've been following the updates. Saw some videos people posted of you and Hollow training. You look good out there. Really good." Clay felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Thanks, son. That means a lot. I'm going to try to come to the competition. If that's okay?" "Of course it's okay. I'd like that a lot." "Okay, I'll be there." "Front row." Marcus paused. "Dad, I've been thinking about what you said, about second chances, about things not being too late. I think maybe I owe you an apology for giving up on us. You don't owe me anything, Marcus. I'm the one who... We both did. We both gave up. But maybe we can stop doing that. Maybe we can be better." After they hung up, Clay sat holding the phone, feeling like the ground beneath his feet had shifted in some fundamental way. Ray and Sarah were still on the porch, and when he rejoined them, they both looked at him with knowing smiles. "Marcus is coming to the competition," Clay said. "That's wonderful," Sarah said, reaching over to squeeze his hand. Ray nodded approvingly. "Everything's coming together, Clay. All the broken pieces finding their way back to where they belong." That night, After Ray and Sarah had left, Clay stood in Hollow's stall, his forehead resting against her neck the way he did when he needed to think. "Jessie," he said quietly, "I don't know if you're out there somewhere, if you can hear this, but I want you to know I'll take care of her. Not the way you did. I could never replace what you two had, but I'll love her the best I can. And maybe, if we're lucky, we'll make you proud out there on Saturday." Hollow turned her head slightly, her warm breath against Clay's cheek. In the quiet of the barn, with spring sounds drifting through the open door, Clay felt something he'd been afraid to acknowledge. Hope. Not the desperate, grasping hope of a man with no other options, but the quiet, steady hope of someone who'd done the work, faced the hard truths, and was ready, truly ready, for whatever came next. Friday morning arrived wrapped in mist, the kind of spring fog that burned off by mid-morning but made the dawn feel intimate and secret. Clay woke before his alarm, had coffee made before the sun cleared the eastern ridge. He stood on the porch watching light creep across his grandfather's land, thinking about all the mornings just like this one. Thousands of them, tens of thousands probably. Each one unremarkable until suddenly they added up to a life. The ranch was quiet. Cisco and Belle were still dozing in their stalls. In the house behind him, Eleanor's journal sat on the kitchen table, where he'd read from it last night. Ray would be here by 7 to help load Hollow and make the drive to Great Falls. The competition started tomorrow, but competitors were required to check in today, get their horses settled, attend the mandatory meeting. Clay walked to the barn, his boots crunching on gravel, his breath making small clouds in the cool air. Hollow was awake, standing near her stall door, waiting. She always knew when something was different, when the routine was about to change. "Morning, girl," he said softly, letting himself into the stall. "Big day ahead. Big weekend, really. You ready for this?" She nuzzled his chest, her signal for wanting attention. Clay obliged, running his hands over her neck, her back, her hindquarters. She was in beautiful condition now, sleek coat gleaming, muscles defined, eyes bright and alert. The broken horse from that auction 6 months ago was gone. In her place stood an athlete, a partner, something worth believing in. His internal monologue had been running all morning, a mix of doubt and determination. Part of him kept whispering that he was too old, too broken, that Hollow was too damaged, that they'd be exposed as frauds the moment they entered that arena. Another part, smaller but growing stronger, reminded him of how far they'd come, of Eleanor's words about second chances, of Ray's faith and Sarah's support and Marcus's promise to be there. He wasn't the man he'd been 15 years ago. He'd never be that man again. But maybe he could be something different, something harder won and more honest. Sarah's truck pulled up just after 6:30. She climbed out carrying a thermos of coffee and a bag that smelled of fresh biscuits. "Couldn't let you face this day on an empty stomach," she said, setting the bag on Clay's porch railing. "Besides, I wanted to make sure you were actually going through with it, having second thoughts about me." "Never." She poured them both coffee, steam rising in the cool air. "But I know how easy it is to talk yourself out of scary things. Wanted to be here to prevent that." They sat together on the porch steps, eating biscuits and drinking coffee as the sun finally broke free of the mountains. There was something comfortable about the silence between them, the kind that came from shared understanding rather than lack of words. "Sarah," Clay said eventually, "I want to thank you for everything. You've been more than a friend, more than I deserved." She turned to look at him, her expression soft. "Clay Mercer, you've always deserved friendship. You just forgot how to accept it for a while." Before he could second-guess himself, Clay leaned over and kissed her. Brief, gentle, a gesture that held both gratitude and something deeper. When he pulled back, Sarah was smiling. "About time," she said quietly. "I was starting to think I'd have to hit you with a fence post to get your attention. I'm slow, but I get there eventually. Win or lose tomorrow. You know that doesn't change anything between us, right? I'm not here because you might win a competition and save your ranch. I'm here because you're worth being here for." Clay nodded, not trusting his voice to stay steady. He squeezed her hand instead, and they sat together watching his land wake up. both of them understanding that whatever happened in Great Falls, something had already shifted, something permanent and good. Ray arrived with his truck and trailer, and together the three of them loaded Hollow. The mare walked up the ramp with confidence now, no fear, no hesitation. Sarah rode with Ray, and Clay drove his own truck, following them down the long gravel drive and onto the highway that would take them to the rest of their lives. The drive to Great Falls took 3 hours. Clay spent most of it alone with his thoughts. The truck cab, a cocoon of silence, except for the engine's rumble and the occasional song on the radio. He thought about his grandfather, about his father, about Eleanor and Marcus, and all the people who'd shaped him into whoever he was becoming. He thought about Hollow and Jesse, and the strange paths that brought broken things together. When they finally pulled into the competition grounds, Clay's stomach clenched. The parking lot was already filling with trucks and trailers, horses being unloaded, people in clean Western shirts and pressed jeans moving with purpose. This was the big leagues. Riders from Montana, Wyoming, and Idaho, some of them professionals, all of them good. They found their assigned spot and got Hollow unloaded and settled in her temporary stall. The mare handled the chaos remarkably well, looking around with interest rather than fear. Other horses nickered greetings. People walked past, some glancing curiously at Hollow, a few doing double takes when they recognized Clay. "That's Clay Mercer," he heard someone whisper. "Used to be somebody. Heard he's making a comeback, on a rescue horse. Can you imagine?" The words stung, but Clay kept his expression neutral. Let them talk. Let them think what they wanted. Tomorrow he'd have his answer. Either they were right and he was a fool, or they were about to be surprised. Tom Harrigan appeared while Clay was checking Hollow's water bucket. The banker was here as a sponsor, his company logo on banners around the venue. Clay. Tom's greeting was formal, but not unfriendly. "Didn't think you'd actually go through with it. Still time to back out, I suppose. Is there?" Tom looked at Hollow, then back at Clay. "Seems like you're pretty committed at this point." "I am." Tom nodded slowly. "I want you to know I'm rooting for you. Professionally, I need you to do well so the bank gets its money. But personally, I'd like to see you succeed. For old time's sake." "Thanks, Tom. That means something." After Tom left, Ray walked Clay through the course they'd be running. The traditional elements were standard: barrels, gatework, cattle-cutting simulations. But then they reached the new obstacle course section, and Clay's breath caught. It was unlike anything he'd seen at a rodeo competition. There were physical obstacles, yes, water crossings, narrow bridges, areas with different footing. But there were also psychological challenges. Speakers that would play unexpected sounds, areas where the rider would have to dismount and trust their horse to stay ground-tied. A final element where horse and rider would be separated by a barrier, and the rider would have to call their horse to come without any physical prompting. "Heart over skill," Ray murmured. "They weren't kidding. This is going to expose every weakness," Clay said, his anxiety rising, "or every strength." Ray put a hand on Clay's shoulder. "Stop looking at it like a test you might fail. Look at it like a chance to show what you and Hollow have built. That connection you have, that's what this course is designed to find. You've got it. You just have to trust it." Evening came with a riders' meeting in the main pavilion. Clay sat in the back trying to be invisible, but people noticed him anyway. Whispers followed him. The prodigal cowboy. The has-been making a last stand. He kept his eyes forward and tried to ignore it. The head judge explained the scoring system, the timing, the rules. When she got to the new obstacle course element, she emphasized what Ray had already told him. Technical perfection mattered less than genuine partnership. They were looking for horses and riders who trusted each other completely, who moved as one unit not because of training, but because of connection. "This isn't about who's practiced the most," the judge said. "It's about who's built something real with their horse. We'll know it when we see it." After the meeting, Clay went to check on Hollow one last time. The evening had turned cool, and the barn area was quiet, most riders having retreated to hotels or campers. Clay let himself into Hollow's stall and sat down in the straw, his back against the wall. Hollow came over immediately, lowering her head so he could reach her face. Clay scratched behind her ears, the gesture automatic after months of repetition. "Tomorrow's the day," he said quietly. "Everything we've been working for comes down to a few minutes in that arena. And I'm scared, Hollow. Scared we're not good enough. Scared of failing in front of everyone again. Scared of proving them all right about me being washed up and foolish." The mayor bumped his chest gently with her nose, a gesture he'd come to recognize as comfort. "But I'm more scared of not trying, of giving up without knowing if we could have done it. So tomorrow, we're going to walk into that arena with our heads up. We're going to show them what broken things can become when they refuse to stay broken." He stayed there for over an hour, just being present with his horse, drawing strength from her calm presence. When he finally left, he felt steadier, more centered. Clay spent the night in his truck, parked near the barn so he could keep an eye on Hollow. Sleep came in fragments, interrupted by anxiety and anticipation. He dreamed of Eleanor, of his grandfather, of riding horses that turned into smoke beneath him. He woke repeatedly, checked his phone for the time, and tried to will himself back to sleep. At 4 in the morning, he gave up and made coffee on the small camp stove Ray had lent him. He sat in the truck bed, watching stars fade as dawn approached, thinking about all the decisions that had led him here. The accident, Eleanor's death, the slow descent into isolation and despair, buying Hollow, choosing to try one more time. Every choice had felt small in the moment. Together, they'd brought him to this parking lot at dawn, waiting to compete in front of people who mostly expected him to fail. The sun was just clearing the horizon when Clay saw a familiar car pull into the lot. His heart jumped. Marcus, his son, got out looking tired but determined and walked over to Clay's truck. They stood facing each other in the early morning light, and Clay felt the weight of 8 years of distance and hurt hanging between them. "You came," Clay said. "I said I would." Marcus smiled, tentative but genuine. "Wouldn't miss it." They didn't hug, they weren't there yet, but they stood together in comfortable silence, watching the competition grounds wake up, and it felt like a beginning. "I'm proud of you," Marcus said eventually. "For doing this?" "For trying," Clay's throat tightened. "Thank you, son. That means everything." By 9 o'clock, the grounds were buzzing with activity. Riders were preparing their horses, checking tack, doing warm-up exercises. Clay went through his routine mechanically, brushed Hollow until she gleamed, checked every piece of equipment 3 times, did stretches that his aging body protested. Sarah appeared with Ray, both of them looking more nervous than Clay felt. They helped him with final preparations, offering encouragement and advice he barely registered. His focus was narrowing to a pinpoint: the arena, the course, Hollow. An official came by with his competition number, 47. The same number Hollow had been when she'd limped into that auction ring 6 months ago. The coincidence felt meaningful, though Clay couldn't have said how. He pinned the number to his shirt, his fingers fumbling slightly. The weight of it felt like more than paper and ink. It felt like possibility, like the last chance at redemption. Like everything he'd lost, and everything he might still find, all compressed into a rectangle of cardstock. "You're on in 2 hours, the official said. "Warm-up arena is open if you need it." Clay nodded, but he didn't move. He stood there with his hand on the number pinned to his chest, feeling the weight of this moment. All the work, all the healing, all the hope and fear and desperate determination had led here. Whatever happened next would define not just his future, but who he'd been trying to become these past months. Win or lose, save the ranch or lose everything, he was about to find out if broken things could truly be made whole. Marcus approached, put a hand on his father's shoulder. "You've got this, Dad." Clay nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He looked at Hollow, standing calm and ready in her stall. He thought of Eleanor's journal, of her belief in second chances. He thought of Ray's faith, Sarah's support, the long, quiet mornings working to heal himself by healing something else. "All right," he said finally, to himself more than anyone else. "All right, let's do this." The warm-up arena was chaos-controlled, riders putting their horses through paces, last-minute adjustments to tack, the nervous energy of competition thick in the air. Clay led Hollow in, and several heads turned. He felt the weight of their attention, the unspoken questions. Some of these riders had been at that auction. Some had laughed. He pushed the thoughts away and focused on Hollow. They walked the perimeter first, letting her get comfortable with the space, the sounds, the presence of other horses. Then he swung into the saddle, and they began their warm-up routine. Figure eights, serpentines, quick turns. Hollow responded beautifully, her movements fluid and confident. Ray stood at the fence watching, his weathered face unreadable. When Clay brought Hollow over for a break, the old cowboy nodded approvingly. "She's ready." "Question is, are you?" "Getting there," Clay admitted. His hands were steady, but his heart was racing. The announcement came over the loudspeaker. "Competitors for the first division, please report to the holding area." Clay's division. His stomach dropped, then settled. This was it. He walked Hollow to the holding area where other riders waited their turn. The arena was visible from here, a large oval with bleachers on both sides, already filling with spectators. Clay could see the obstacle course set up in the far section, intimidating in its complexity. Riders were called in order. Clay watched the first few competitors, studying their runs, seeing how the horses reacted to the obstacles. Most were solid, good technical riding, clean runs. But there was something missing, some quality the judges had talked about. The riders were working their horses, controlling them, but not partnering with them. Then a young woman on a palomino gelding entered the ring, and everything changed. The way they moved together was different, synchronized, harmonious, like they were thinking with one mind. The crowd responded, leaning forward, sensing something special. When they finished, the applause was genuine and sustained. That was the standard. That was what Clay and Hollow were competing against. "Number 47, Clay Mercer on Hollow," the announcer called. Ray appeared at Hollow's side, a small piece of ribbon in his hand. Before Clay could ask, Ray was braiding it into Hollow's mane, his fingers quick and practiced. "What's that?" Clay asked. "Something of Jesse's," Ray said quietly. "From one of his competitions. Thought it might be fitting, past and present, all of us connected." Clay's eyes stung. He nodded, not trusting his voice. Sarah was there too, and Marcus standing together at the fence. Sarah blew him a kiss. Marcus gave him a thumbs up, his face tight with nervous hope. Clay gathered the reins, took a deep breath, and nudged Hollow forward. They walked toward the arena entrance, and with each step, Clay felt the years falling away. Not erasing. He'd never be the man he was before the accident, before Eleanor's death. But maybe he didn't need to be. Maybe he could be this man instead, scarred, humbled, but still here, still trying. The gate opened. The arena spread before them, bright with afternoon sun. The crowd noise hit him like a wave. Hundreds of people in the bleachers, some recognizing him. The murmur of surprise and speculation rippling through the stands. Clay made eye contact with Hollow, and something passed between them, understanding, trust, a promise that they'd face this together. The announcer's voice echoed through the space. "Next up, we have Clay Mercer from Stillwater, Montana. Some of you might remember Clay from his championship days. He's making his return to competition after 15 years, riding a rescue mare named Hollow." The crowd's reaction was mixed. Some applause, some skeptical silence, some outright laughter. Clay heard it all and felt none of it. His world had narrowed to this. Hollow beneath him, the course ahead, the moment at hand. They moved to the starting position. Clay could feel Hollow's muscles coiled beneath him, ready but not tense. She was trusting him to guide her, and he was trusting her to respond. The judge raised the flag. "On your mark." Clay's hand rested on Hollow's neck, feeling her warmth, her strength, her heart beating steady and sure. The flag dropped. They exploded forward. The first obstacle was a gate. Hollow had to approach. Stand still while Clay opened it. Walk through. Then stand again while he closed it. Basic, but it tested patience and training. Hollow performed it perfectly, her movements precise, waiting for Clay's cues without fidgeting. Next came the barrel pattern. This was speed and agility, tight turns that tested both horse and rider. Clay leaned into each turn, and Hollow responded like she'd been doing this all her life. They carved through the pattern, dirt flying from her hooves. The crowd beginning to react with surprise and growing interest. The serpentine course was next, weaving through poles that required constant adjustments and communication. Clay barely touched the reins, using his legs and weight to guide her. Hollow moved like water, flowing through the course with a grace that made it look effortless. Then they hit the new obstacles, the heart-over-skill section that would separate the technical riders from the true partners. First was the water crossing. Clay felt Hollow hesitate for just a fraction of a second. This was new, this was scary. But he squeezed with his legs, spoke to her softly, and she trusted. She walked into the water without balking, steady and brave. The crowd gasped. Several horses before them had refused this obstacle. Next was the bridge, narrow and elevated. Hollow's ears flicked back and forward, processing. Clay gave her the reins, let her make the choice. She stepped onto the bridge, testing it, then committed. They crossed without hesitation, Hollow's confidence growing with each successful obstacle. The sound test came next. Speakers hidden around the course would play unexpected noises. Dogs barking, cars honking, crowd noise amplified. It was designed to panic horses, to test whether training could override instinct. The sounds erupted around them. Hollow's head came up, her body tensed, and Clay felt her prepare to bolt. This was it, the moment that would prove or disprove everything they'd built. "Easy, girl," Clay murmured, his voice calm despite his racing heart. "I've got you." "You're safe." His hand stroked her neck where Ray had braided Jessie's ribbon. Hollow felt it, the touch, the voice, the promise. Her muscles relaxed. She shook her head once, as if dismissing the noise as unimportant, and walked forward. The crowd erupted in applause. Even the skeptics were impressed, but the hardest part was still ahead, the trust challenge. Clay had to dismount, walk 20 feet away, and call Hollow to come to him. No lead rope, no physical control. Just voice and trust. Clay swung down from the saddle, his boots hitting the arena dirt. He looked at Hollow, and she looked back at him, her dark eyes intelligent and questioning. This was everything. This moment right here. If she came, it meant she trusted him completely. If she didn't, he walked the 20 feet, turned and faced her. The arena went silent. Hollow stood where he'd left her, reins dragging on the ground, completely free to run if she chose. Around them, the massive arena held its breath. In the bleachers, hundreds of faces watched. Clay could see Marcus standing at the fence, hands gripped tight on the rail. Sarah beside him, one hand over her mouth. Ray, steady and calm, nodding slightly as if to say, "You know what to do." Clay held out his hand. "Hollow, come here, girl." For a heartbeat, nothing. Hollow's ears swiveled forward, listening, processing. Clay could see the calculation happening behind those intelligent eyes. The same calculation she'd made that first day at the auction when he'd stood at the bottom of the trailer ramp, asking her to trust. Then she took a step, another, walking toward him with the same deliberate confidence she'd shown climbing into that trailer 6 months ago, when she'd chosen to believe that maybe this human was different. The crowd noise started low, then built, people realizing what they were witnessing. Understanding that this wasn't just training, this was connection. This was a broken horse choosing to trust a broken man, and both of them choosing to believe that trust still meant something. Hollow walked the full 20 feet and pressed her nose into Clay's outstretched palm. His fingers found the ribbon Ray had braided into her mane, and he felt the weight of it, Jessie's memory. Eleanor's faith, his grandfather's legacy, all of it woven together in this moment. "Good girl," Clay whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "That's my brave, beautiful girl." He remounted, and they completed the final elements. A quick sprint to the finish, a final gate, a moment of stillness at the end. When Clay raised his hand to signal completion, the arena exploded with noise. People were on their feet, applauding, some wiping their eyes. Even the judges were smiling. Clay guided Hollow out of the arena, his hands shaking now that it was over. He'd done it. They'd done it. Maybe not perfectly. Maybe not with the technical precision of younger riders on expensive horses. But they'd shown heart. They'd shown partnership. They'd shown that redemption was possible. Ray was waiting at the gate, his weathered face split in a grin. Sarah was crying openly. Marcus pushed through the crowd and did something he hadn't done since he was a child. He hugged his father, hard and tight and real. "Dad," Marcus said, his voice muffled against Clay's shoulder. You were amazing." Clay held his son, one hand still on Hollow's reins, and felt something in his chest crack open, not breaking, but healing. A wound finally getting air and light. The rest of the competition passed in a blur. More riders went through their paces, some excellent, some less so. Clay tried to watch, tried to gauge how he'd placed, but his mind kept replaying his own run, looking for mistakes, wondering if he'd done enough. Results wouldn't be posted until all divisions had finished. That meant waiting, and waiting had never been Clay's strong suit. He walked Hollow to cool her down, brushed her until she gleamed, gave her treats and praise and all the affection she'd let him give. Sarah brought him water and a sandwich he couldn't eat. Marcus stayed close, talking about the run, reliving moments, his enthusiasm reminding Clay of the boy he'd been before life and loss had put distance between them. "The way she came to you at the end," Marcus kept saying. Everyone felt it. The whole arena felt it. Afternoon stretched into evening. The final division finished their runs. An announcement came over the loudspeaker. "Results will be posted in 30 minutes. Award ceremony to follow." Those 30 minutes felt like hours. Clay tried to stay calm, tried to tell himself that winning didn't matter, that he'd already won by completing the course, by showing up, by trying. But the lie tasted bitter. He wanted to win. Wanted it desperately, not for pride but for survival. The prize money would save his ranch, would give him breathing room, would prove that taking this chance had been right. Finally, the announcement came. Results are posted at the main pavilion. The crowd surged toward the board. Clay hung back, letting others go first, not sure he could handle reading the results with everyone watching. But Marcus grabbed his arm and pulled him forward. And then they were standing in front of the official scoring sheet. Clay's eyes found number 47, his competition number, and traced across the columns. Technical score, 8.2 out of 10. Good, but not great. Several riders had scored higher. But then the next column, partnership and connection, 9.8 out of 10. The highest score in that category. The new element, the heart-over-skill component, had been weighted heavily in the final calculations. Total score, 18.0 out of 20. His eyes moved up the board, looking for anything higher. There were strong scores, 17.3, 17.8, several in the high 17s, and then, at the top, 18.2, a young woman named Sarah Chen on a horse named Lucky. She'd beaten him by 0.2 of a point. Clay stared at the board, processing. Second place. He'd taken second place. The prize for second was $25,000, half of what he needed. Not enough to save the ranch outright, but enough to buy more time, enough to make a substantial payment to the bank. He felt Marcus's hand on his shoulder, squeezing tight. "Second place, Dad, out of 73 competitors. That's incredible." Sarah appeared on his other side, her eyes shining. "Clay, you should be so proud." But pride wasn't what he felt. He felt disappointment crushing down on him, felt the reality settling in, that he'd come so close and missed, that he'd bet everything on this moment, and it hadn't been quite enough. Ray's voice cut through his spiral. "Look at me, son." Clay turned. Ray's face was serious but not disappointed. "You rode your heart out. You and that horse showed everyone what's possible. Second place against this field, at your age, after 15 years away from competition, that's not failure. That's triumph. It's not enough money to save the ranch," Clay said, the words heavy. "Maybe not, but it's enough to keep fighting. And sometimes that's all we can ask for. Another round, another chance, another day to figure it out." The award ceremony was held in the main arena as the sun set behind the mountains. Clay stood on the podium with the second-place ribbon, Hollow beside him, and accepted the congratulations of strangers and friends alike. Sarah Chen, the first-place winner, shook his hand and told him his run had been inspiring, that she'd almost cried watching Hollow come to him at the end. when they called him forward to receive his prize check. Clay looked out at the crowd and saw faces he recognized. Tom Harrigan was there, applauding respectfully. People from Stillwater who'd driven up to watch. And in the front row, Marcus and Sarah and Ray, the people who'd believed in him when he'd stopped believing in himself. The check in his hand represented hope, not salvation. It was something, but not everything. Still holding it, standing on that podium with Hollow beside him, Clay felt something shift. Not the burden lifting completely, but its weight redistributing, becoming bearable. As the sun set and the crowd dispersed, Clay led Hollow back to her stall. Marcus walked with him, comfortable in the silence between them. "What happens now?" Marcus asked. "I take this money to the bank, see if Tom will work with me. Maybe sell off some equipment, cut some corners. Find a way to make it work." Clay stroked Hollow's neck. "And if I can't, well, at least I tried. At least I gave it everything." Marcus nodded slowly. "You know, I've been thinking. I have some savings. Not a lot, but some. If you need help making up the difference, Marcus, I can't ask you to." "You're not asking. I'm offering." Marcus met his father's eyes. "Let me help. Let me be part of saving Grandpa's ranch." "Our ranch," Clay felt his throat close with emotion. He pulled his son into another hug, this one lasting longer, meaning more. "Thank you," he managed. "Thank you, son." They loaded Hollow into the trailer as stars began appearing in the darkening sky. The drive home would be long, and tomorrow would bring new challenges, new calculations, new struggles. But tonight, Clay had his son beside him, a horse who'd shown him what courage looked like, and $25,000 toward a future that suddenly felt possible again. It wasn't the fairy tale ending, but it was real, and it was his, and it was enough for now. Spring turned to early summer, and the Montana grassland turned green in a way that still took Clay's breath away after 54 years of seeing it. He stood on his porch, in the soft light of a June evening, coffee in hand, watching Hollow graze in the pasture beside Cisco and Belle. The three horses had formed their own small herd, and there was something peaceful about seeing them together, old and young, broken and healing, all of them finding their place. The ranch was still his. Barely, but his Tom Harrigan had worked with him after the competition, impressed enough by Clay's second-place finish to grant another extension and restructure the debt. Combined with the prize money, Marcus's contribution, which Clay had accepted after much argument and eventual gratitude, and the sale of some equipment he didn't need anymore, Clay had scraped together enough to satisfy the bank and buy himself breathing room. It wasn't fixed. The ranch still struggled, still demanded more than it gave back. But it was manageable now, sustainable. And Clay had learned that sustainable was sometimes better than spectacular. The door behind him opened, and Sarah stepped out, carrying her own coffee. She'd started spending more time at the ranch, her presence becoming as natural as the sunrise. They hadn't rushed anything, hadn't tried to force what was growing between them into something bigger than it needed to be. But there was an understanding now, a quiet partnership that felt right. "Penny for your thoughts," she said, settling into the chair beside him, just thinking about how different everything looks from 6 months ago. Different good or different complicated? Clay smiled. Both, mostly good. Sarah's own situation had improved as well. The developers had backed off after she and Clay had connected with an environmental group that raised concerns about the proposed resort's impact on wildlife corridors. The legal battle wasn't over, but Sarah had allies now, and time, and the determination to fight for what was hers. A truck came up the drive, and Clay recognized it immediately. Marcus had been coming most weekends, making up for lost time. He'd learned to ride again, spending hours with Clay in the training ring, and there was something healing about teaching his son the things his own father had taught him. Legacy passing down the line, not through perfection, but through presence. Marcus climbed out of the truck and walked over, dropping his bag on the porch. "Hey, Dad, Sarah. Son, good drive." "Not bad. Roads were clear." Marcus looked toward the pasture where Hollow grazed. "How's she doing?" "Good, real good." Clay felt the familiar warmth that came with talking about the horse. Doc Martinez was out yesterday, gave her a full checkup. Says she's in the best health she's probably ever been in. That's because she's got someone who actually cares about her now, Sarah said, and the simple truth of it made Clay's chest tight. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the evening deepen into dusk. Ray would be by tomorrow. He'd become a regular fixture as well, helping with training, sharing stories, being the connection to the past that Clay needed to move forward. The old cowboy had even started talking about bringing other rescue horses to the ranch, using Hollow's story to create something bigger. An idea was forming, still vague, but full of possibility. "I got a call from a reporter yesterday," Marcus said, "from one of those feel-good news shows. They want to do a story on you and Hollow. Local cowboy and rescue horse find redemption or something like that." Clay made a face. "I don't know about all that. It might be good publicity," Sarah suggested. "Could help with Ray's idea about turning this into a rescue and rehabilitation program." Maybe. Clay was still uncomfortable with attention, with the idea of his struggles being entertainment for strangers. But he was also learning that sometimes you had to accept help in whatever form it came, even if it made you uncomfortable. The phone rang inside, and Sarah went to answer it. When she came back, her expression was thoughtful. That was Elena Martinez. "She's got a call about a horse that needs help. Owners can't afford to keep it anymore, looking for someone who might take it in. She thought of you." Clay looked at Hollow, remembered the day he'd bought her for $50, remembered how everyone had thought he was foolish. But that choice had led to everything good that had come after. The competition, reconnecting with Marcus, finding something with Sarah, remembering who he was beneath all the grief and failure. "Tell her yes," Clay said. "Tell her we'll take it." "We?" Marcus looked at him with raised eyebrows. "You're here most weekends anyway. Might as well put you to work." Clay smiled at his son. "If you're interested." Marcus's face lit up in a way Clay hadn't seen since he was a boy. Yeah, I'm interested." As full dark settled over the ranch, Clay walked out to the pasture where Hollow stood, a dark silhouette against the last light in the western sky. She came to the fence when she saw him, pressing her nose into his palm in the greeting that had become their ritual. "You changed my life," Clay said quietly, stroking her face. "You know that?" "Broken horse saves broken man. Sounds like something from a bad movie, but it's the truth." Hollow's warm breath against his hand was answer enough. Clay thought about Eleanor's journal, still on his bedside table, still read from most nights. Her words about second chances had proven prophetic. It hadn't been too late. It wasn't too late. Every day was another chance to be better than yesterday, to build something meaningful from the wreckage of what had been lost. He thought about Jessie, the young rider who'd loved this horse first, who died too young, but whose memory lived on in every ribbon braided into Hollow's mane at competitions. They'd done 3 more since the Frontier Challenge. Small local events, nothing as grand, but each one a celebration of how far they'd come. They hadn't won any of them, but winning had stopped being the point. Marcus and Sarah joined him at the fence, the 3 of them standing together looking at the horses in the gathering dark. Behind them, the ranch house glowed with warm light. Tomorrow would bring work, fences to mend, hay to move, the endless tasks that defined ranch life. And now, a new horse to help, a new life to save. But tonight was for standing still, for appreciating what had been rebuilt from the broken pieces. Clay had his son back, had found unexpected love with Sarah, had saved his grandfather's ranch, at least for now, had proven that he could still show up, still try, still matter, and he had Hollow. The horse that nobody wanted, who taught him that being broken wasn't the end of the story. It was sometimes just the beginning. "You know what I realized?" Clay said, not looking away from the horses. "Sometimes the things we rescue end up rescuing us right back." Sarah slipped her hand into his. Marcus put an arm around his father's shoulders, and in the pasture, Hollow raised her head and nickered softly. A sound of contentment and home. The stars came out overhead, the same stars that had watched over this land for generations, that would watch over it for generations more. Clay Mercer wasn't the man he'd been 15 years ago, before the accident, before the loss. He was someone different now, scarred, humbled, but still here, still trying, still believing that tomorrow might be better than today, that broken things could find purpose, that it was never too late to come back from the edge. He'd bought a horse at an auction for $50, and that horse had given him everything back. Not the life he'd lost, but a new life, built from honesty and effort, and the simple courage to keep showing up even when it hurt. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of grass and horse and home. Clay breathed it in and felt at peace for the first time in years. The future was uncertain, it always would be. But he wasn't facing it alone anymore, and that made all the difference. In the darkness, Hollow's nameplate caught the porch light, the new one Clay had commissioned after the competition. It read, "Hollow Heart of Hope," and beneath it in smaller letters, "Sometimes broken things save each other." Clay squeezed Sarah's hand, felt Marcus's arms solid across his shoulders, and watched his horses graze under the stars. This was what redemption looked like. Not dramatic or perfect, but real and earned, and worth every hard step it had taken to get here. "Come on," he said finally. "Let's go inside. I'll make dinner." They walked back to the house together, a found family, a patchwork of broken pieces that had somehow formed something whole. And behind them in the pasture, Hollow watched them go, standing strong and steady and healed, a living reminder that second chances were real and worth fighting for. Sometimes the things we rescue end up rescuing us right back.